So how's everyone's day going? Excited for our conversation?
Yes, very excited.
Perfect. And so again, thank you to everyone for joining. We've had so many people say they're excited about this conversation. So hi, everyone. And again, we're so excited for this dialogue today with Alexis Cirel here, from a partner at Warshaw, Burnstein's Matrimonial and Family Law Group, and Angela Richardson-Mook, co-founder and executive director of Alcea Surrogacy. So thank you again for joining us.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having us.
Of course. And just really quickly before we dive in, for anyone here that's new to GoStork, we are the first fertility marketplace where intended parents find, compare, and connect with top fertility providers. And our mission is to bring transparency to the fertility industry and really to help intended parents make much more informed decisions about their providers. And through these Instagram lives, we love to help bring insights and support from the experts, as well as those who have walked the path that new intended parents might just be embarking on. And so our lovely guests today both have close personal as well as, of course, professional ties to infertility, as well as a deep knowledge of the Child Parent Security Act, which recently legalized compensated gestational surrogacy in New York, as most of you know. So whether advocating for it in the years leading up to the act passing in the case of Alexis, or working every day to successfully integrate all the necessary measures into her agency's New York area services in the case of Angela, and that's probably just the tip of the iceberg for both of you. Sorry, I'm just having a slight technical thing here too. Anyway, we're hopefully going to provide you with a really helpful overview, talk about a little bit of the kind of confusion out there. We've heard some questions and misconceptions from some that are just kind of asking about some of the differences about doing surrogacy locally. And there are just so many benefits for New York intended parents to do their journey closer to home that we'd love to touch on and just help everyone really understand. So without further ado, I'd love to dive right in and do some brief introductions with both of you. So can you each kind of briefly share your personal fertility journeys and kind of your ties to the fertility world, as well as your professional roles? And, as we see so much in this industry, how one kind of inspired the other, we often see these ties, and we'd love to hear your background. How about we start with Alexis?
Okay, sure. Why not? So I'm an attorney, like you said, and I live and work in New York, and I was practicing commercial litigation for the first 10 years of my professional life. And then when my husband and I went to start our family, after many, many years of failed and unexplained fertility treatments, we ultimately went with surrogacy, and we had a surrogate for both of my children, who are 5 and 7 now, the same woman. And I often look back on it and I say, at the time, what I felt was such a negative thing in my life, because I felt like it was a failure for me, because I had tried to become pregnant on my own, but turned into a miracle in a way that I would never change, just because of the human connections that I had throughout it and how it impacted me professionally. So what's that story? That story is literally since the first meeting that I had with the attorney who helped us with our surrogacy arrangement, which had to take place in New Jersey because it was not legal in New York at the time, I was really inspired that I wanted to be able to do this for other intended parents and for surrogates who wanted to be involved in these arrangements. So I made a switch, and because it was not legal in New York at the time, I just focused my efforts on other areas of family law while advocating and lobbying hard to get the law changed in New York. And finally we did. So now I'm practicing, in addition to other parts of family law, ART, or assisted reproductive technology law, and fertility law, and cannot wait, really can't wait to help other families grow in this literally miraculous way. I mean, I have to tell you, just yesterday, I was casually texting with the woman who carried both my children, just about nonsense, but like I would never have had her in my life before. So she changed me, as a human, as a person, as a mother, as a woman, and as an attorney.
And it's such a beautiful relationship,
Yeah.
And Angela?
Yeah, so I actually started my journey into the third-party reproductive space in the different capacity of Alexis, insofar as that I was a carrier. And so I was a carrier for a couple that lived in New York City. And I can remember the agency that I worked with always said that surrogacy was kind of like a birthday cake. You get to share this amazing thing with other people, and then the day kind of ends, but you still go on with your life remembering how amazing that birthday cake was. And I always kind of remember that in the back of my mind, because I feel like with all of my intended parents that I carried for, I got kind of the birthday cake, the ice cream, and like all of the sprinkles on top. So
guest for this today.
Awesome.
I kicked the people out, but this one kind of
no worries. We love you. Yeah. So the first couple that I carried for that lived in New York City was a gay couple, and I actually carried all 3 of their children. And so they're obviously an enormous part of our life still today. The journey itself was close to, between 8 and 9 years. And what's really awesome for me is that as we launched Alcea, he was an integral part of doing a lot of the parent outreach and a lot of the research to ensure that we had, a true queer focused perspective in all that we built. As a cis white woman, it's not my place to speak there. So it was wonderful to have him as a partner, and what an amazing full circle to have him now help us do a lot of the work that we do and reach out in the community. I went on to carry for 2 more couples, one more couple in New York City that I carried 1 child for, and then a final couple that I carried 2 sisters for. So I was very fortunate that for surrogacy, it truly shaped me in ways that I can't even articulate. There are no words. I think that for me, when I really decided and it was solidified in my heart that I knew that this is what I needed to be doing, not just personally, but professionally, was with my last couple. They were a couple that really had been challenged with infertility, that just is the paramount of sadness, just every possible thing that could go wrong, late losses, just everything. And I can remember, unfortunately, the first child of theirs that was born, I had precipitous labor, so they couldn't get there. And so I was holding the baby when they both came around the corner in the hospital room to take the child. And I can remember handing the baby over to her, and I literally saw years of pain and uncertainty and like, oh my gosh, this is really happening. And I saw her turn into a mother in front of my eyes. Oh my God. And it's nothing that and I know to someone like an outsider looking in, it's hard to kind of wrap your brain around what that means, because everyone just looks at childbearing in this traditional way. But I'm adopted as well. And so I'm already of a mindset that love makes a family. And so to see that and to see the life-changing moment in real time it's etched in my mind. My husband was actually videotaping as they came in, and when I'm having a bad day, I'll pull that video up and watch it, because it reminds me when I have hard days in this, or we have a loss, or we have intended parents that don't ever, make it to the end game of building their family. I can remember that there's light at the end of the tunnel for a lot of folks. Yeah. So, personally, that's my kind of surrogacy story. I also did 2 egg donations. Throughout all of that time, I worked in corporate America. I was an SVP for Bank of America. I was a consultant for Deloitte. I did a lot of program project management, business development. And then when the CPSA, obviously a lot of people had been fighting for a very long time to have the legalization of surrogacy in New York come to fruition. I was very active in working on legislation in North Carolina in regards to changing the way they do their birth certificates for parent 1 versus parent 2 versus mother and father. So I was really familiar with the process, but I was also familiar with all of the roadblocks and all of the political challenges that often come when it seems like a pretty simple ask. And so when it felt like everything was really going to happen, we began to build Alcea in Texas so that we could have a good pipeline of people, we could vet our processes, build our system, and really be prepared. Because from our perspective, and from someone that's been in the industry for 15 years, we've seen so many agencies that, have taken advantage of escrow funds. We've seen so many conflict of interests. We've seen so many things. And when I look at the Surrogate Bill of Rights that the CPSA has really kind of mandated, in my opinion, it's really what all good agencies should have already been incorporating into their contracts.
Yeah, we'll get
So
to that.
I just really love the fact that that is kind of where we're headed. And that's what really got me interested in working with a ton of experts in the New York area to really build something that would, continue this work and work in an ethical space that I think is inherent for everyone's success.
Yeah, thank you for that overview. And I think like that moment that you talked about, seeing the parents by then, right, become parents in that moment, I think there's probably no words to describe it, but you still articulated it so well. I mean, as close as you can get probably. So thank you for that. So let's dive into the conversation for today and hopefully educate everyone here about what they came to learn about. And so Alexis, as the lawyer in our little group of three, can you give everyone just a high-level overview about what the CPSA involves just from a legal perspective? I think that's a good starting point, and then we'll dive into some of the specific components we wanted to cover.
Sure. So the CPSA is actually, we all call it like the surrogacy bill, the surrogacy law. That's the sexy way to talk about it. And that was the biggest news splash. But it's really broader than that. It's much more conceptual. What it does is it brings New York's statutory law on parentage up to date and in line with modern technology. So I'll just give you an example. Well, two examples to highlight how much it was needed. Number one is that before the CPSA, only New York and Michigan outlawed compensated surrogacy, and sometimes Louisiana. Sometimes people say 3 states, some people say 2. But that just goes to show you how much of an outlier we were with respect to surrogacy. Mm-hmm. But with respect to assisted reproductive technology and parentage laws surrounding that, it was also so outdated, as reflected by the fact that our statute that was in place before this was drafted in 1974. When was IVF invented, you ask? After 1974. So you can see that it was really, really antiquated. It didn't apply to so many, and when I say apply, I mean like protect, cover, secure. So many families built through donation arrangements, surrogacy, you name it. So the law is really broad and sweeping, and the reason, the name means something. The Child Parent Security Act, what it does is it legally secures a parent and child relationship, as opposed to creating one like you would do, through adoption. It secures one that really already exists, because it models parentage off of intent to be a parent and consent. So those two things together, if you think about it, really apply in assisted reproductive technology. It applies in surrogacy, right? A gestational carrier or gestational surrogate, she is carrying the pregnancy, but not with the intent to be a parent, with the intent to relinquish any parentage rights and simply just be the carrier for those intended parents. And that's what we call them in the statutes. And on the other end, the flip side, and this is whether or not there's a genetic connection to the intended mother, intended father, two intended fathers, you can have a donation with surrogacy. The bottom line is that the woman who's carrying the baby is not genetically related to the baby and has no intent to be a parent of the baby. And then on the flip side, with intended parents, you do intend to this. So regardless of biology, regardless of gestation, you're intending to become a parent, and therefore you are. So this law really secures that relationship. And how does it do that with surrogacy? Well, basically, it allows for intended parents on the one hand, and a surrogate, and if she's married, her spouse, to enter into enforceable surrogacy agreements. If you enter into an enforceable surrogacy agreement that meets the statutory requirements by operation of law, and that's a really important thing to focus on, by operation of law, you are the legal parents of your child upon birth. There are procedural mechanisms that the statute allows for that basically say you get that contract in place, you satisfy the requirements. And there are many, but that's what we lawyers do, satisfy the requirements. And then as soon as a pregnancy is achieved, and sometimes could even do it before then, after you sign a contract, but you can get a pre-birth order. You can go to the court, you get a judgment of parentage before your child's born, and from the moment that your child is born, you have a secure legal relationship. So in terms of a really high level description of how revolutionary it is, that I think that really encapsulates it. And I know we're going to get into more nuances later, but I think that's a good overview.
And thankfully this finally happened. It's so crazy for New York to be so far behind on this, but
right. And I should just add one other really important thing, because I'm talking a little bit of lawyer speak, but just to humanize it more too. Getting a judgment of parentage, like I was saying, this pre-birth order is very, very different than having to go through an adoption process. This is not an adoption. This is not a second parent adoption. This is none of those things. This is a judgment of parentage so that your names go on the birth certificate, full stop.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you so much. And so now let's talk about why New York intended parents should strongly consider surrogacy locally. I mean, it seems obvious, but there also seems to be some confusion about it. So I'd love to just dive into, there's a handful of great reasons why you'd want to stay closer to home and how secure you should feel with the CPSA now. So I'd love to hear both of your perspectives on this. And, also from a personal perspective, Alexis, I know obviously you did a surrogacy journey out of state. And so you had what a lot of parents have gone through with the travel involved and everything. But I'd love to just hear, all the benefits for intended parents that are just starting to think about this journey in New York.
Well, I can say from my perspective, especially on the surrogate side, all of my intended parents had to move their embryos from a clinic in New York to a clinic outside of New York so that I could travel there to do the embryo transfer, because those clinics were not comfortable doing any kind of compensated surrogacy within their clinic. And so, obviously the continuity of care, you've got to remember, for a lot of people that have been dealing with infertility, it's oftentimes, a decade plus journey. It's, in times hundreds of thousands of dollars. And you really begin to establish a rapport and a bedside manner with someone that you trust and that you care. And so that in and of itself, I think, was a challenge for all of my intended parents, that they had to kind of change that continuity and move to a new doctor simply because the New York law didn't support what they were able to do. In addition, every single one of my intended parents, except for one in all 6 of my surrogacies, missed the birth because there was just not a way for them to take off the amount of time of work that it would take to get and come and sit, and then also have to deal with all of the things that happen after the birth to get back. And if you think about all of the, trials and tribulations that someone goes through to get a child, I mean, this truly takes a tribe. These are warriors. These are people that, if you think about all that goes into bringing one of these children into the world, it brings tears to my eyes. Like the amount of, it's not just the money, it's the emotional capital, it's the energy, it's the amount of people that have to come together to make it happen. And then to not be able to be present simply because there's a geographical distance, that definitely was something that played a part. But let's just also talk about some of the things that New York has done in order to ensure that this is the most ethical and safe process. So within the CPSA, you've got the Surrogate Bill of Rights. And the Surrogate Bill of Rights is really not something that should be a surprise to anybody that's familiar with third-party reproduction or surrogacy. It talks through things like that your carrier has the ability to consent to a cesarean, a C-section if she wants to. It talks about that she has to consent to a multiple embryo transfer. You can't force that on her. There's a decision to end the pregnancy, which is a constitutionally protected right, and any good agency should be talking about termination in conversation 2 or 3 when matching. So these are not discussions or things that haven't already been going on. The Surrogate Bill of Rights basically puts it into law, and it's a protection for both the intended parent and the surrogate. There is, you know, a separation from legal counsel. You know, there are a lot of people across the country that work with agencies that have in-house legal, and the same attorney represents both the intended parent and the carrier, or maybe the agency attorney represents the intended parent and then they farm out the representation for the surrogate. And I can tell you, as a surrogate, it always felt to me like, well, of course the agency is looking out for the intended parent. Their in-house counsel works for them. So the best interest is going to be in them versus me when I was just to pick a random, you know, attorney. So I think the things that these laws and the statutes are really putting into a mandate versus something that everyone knows is ethically the right thing, but not necessarily mandatory or legally mandated. It allows everyone to be more protected in the process. And, you know, I think finally, just the continuity of being able to have a carrier in the place that you live, you know, not just the delivery, the ability to go to appointments, the ability to use some of the best medical care in the entire world.
In New York,
yeah. And also New York City is a melting pot. There are, you know, so many different cultures. There are so many different kinds of people, so many different diverse types of families, trans families, you know, gay families, all of these things, and all of these unique situations. And New York is a place that accepts everyone. New York is a place that everyone can find a home. And so if you're looking at it from the perspective of someone from New York who might have a unique circumstance that has to go to Texas or North Carolina, I'll never forget my intended fathers. The very first time that I delivered in North Carolina, the nurse said to them that they were the first gay Jewish couple that she'd ever met. And so it was just interesting to them. And they were
That's
kind.
not a thing that happens in New York City.
Exactly right. And so why not be in a place where you have representation, because representation matters. There are things that as a cis white woman, I can't speak about, but if I have an ability to tap into women of color carriers because I have a ton of women of color intended parents, why not try to do our best in matching those types of people so that everyone can have a lived experience that can cause people to connect? And New York is a place that is absolutely unparalleled in that. Like, you can't compare another place to that. So I think there's so many protections that are there.
And just to add to that too, like, you're exactly right. And you're exactly right from a social and moral perspective, but the law reflects that now, finally.
Exactly.
So New York's law, unlike many, many, many other states' laws, does not discriminate in terms of who is eligible to be an intended parent. So you can be a single intended parent under our law. You can be same-sex couple, married or not. You can be heterosex couple, married or not. So there's, you know, it reflects the social reality. It reflects everything. And there are other states that, you know, that you say you feel are more progressive because they allow it or they don't prohibit surrogacy. But then you read the fine print and, oh, right, unless you are a married heterosexual man and woman couple, you have to still adopt your child. So
yeah, when we have new intended parents come into our pipeline, one of the very first things that we do is decide based on their marital status where we can even source a carrier. And so it causes their time to wait for a carrier to be quite a bit longer. And
That
believe it or
matching
not,
period.
yeah, the waiting period is longer. And actually, single women using sperm donors have the least amount of choices of anyone. Gay men actually have more you know, choices if they're married than, you know, and I find that to be so interesting. But, you know, it's the patriarchy at work. You know, the single mother isn't necessarily something that a lot of people are going to get on board with. But, you know, some of those single mothers by choice have only a handful of states unless they want to adopt their own child, which never feels good to someone. So I think it just opens it up to say, if you have the capacity to be, because let's make no mistake, I think there's this misguided assumption about surrogacy as a whole, and I read it all the time on social media, that surrogacy is about taking advantage of marginalized women. And I want to just set the record straight that is absolutely not the case. So what you have is a vetting process for both intended parents and carriers. And the CPSA really mandates what most ethical agencies are already doing. They are doing things like background checks, credit checks, not accepting women that are on any kind of social assistance. Not to say that we do not believe so wholeheartedly in those safety nets, but it's just not the right time to dive into something so complex, nor would we want the compensation from surrogacy to potentially have them lose the benefits that their family needs to survive. You know, we dive into everything, single women, you know, their sexual activity, their, you know, STD checks, STI checks, mental health, virtual home visits. I mean, the vetting process for a carrier is incredibly rigorous, and they open up like every vulnerable aspect of their life. We meet their family, we meet anyone that lives in their house. And I think there's this rich white women take advantage of marginalized carriers. And I hear this all the time, like it's a part of this business. And you know, are there places that do that? Ukraine, India, others that don't have like the restrictions or the oversight that we do? Absolutely. But that's not what surrogacy is about. Surrogacy in the United States is about building families. And if we can do more of what the CPSA is doing to make these things more legitimate and to have these things be mandated, it's going to allow more people to see this process as an option for them, because there are so many misconceptions about the kind of situations that agencies specifically and attorneys like Alexa that we you know put together and the matches that we make.
Yeah. And we want to get to a couple of those soon, but I also wanted to ask you, Alexis, because you know, we talked about missed births, and this happens a lot, right? This just happened to our founder, actually. But you know, as a fellow NICU parent, I had a child in the NICU for a month, and I can't imagine being really, really far from home and going through that. It's already traumatic enough if you have another child at home and such. And so, you know, it's not just about missing births. If you have a premature child, you know, they end up wonderful in the end, right? In most cases, but it's such a different experience if you're spending a month or two really far from home, from your family and your partner and your support system. And I think, Alexis, we had talked about that a little in your case.
Yep. My son, I mean, he wasn't even a preemie. There was just it was like he inhaled something when he was born. So right to the NICU he went, and we lived in New York City at the time, and this was Pittsburgh. So, you know, I slept on the floor in a little closet in the hospital for 2 weeks. My family came in and stayed in hotels nearby, but certainly that would have been a different experience if we were close to home. And, you know, I like to just add, though, it's, yes, on top of all the years of heartache and the you know, the logistics that go into it, I didn't need that on top of it. But I don't want to make surrogacy also only about a light at the end of people's dark tunnel, because for gay male couples, for example, right, or women who are born without it, some people just know this is going to be their path to parenthood, and let's celebrate it. Like I like to say to people when I first meet them, like, let's start with congratulations, this is so exciting, because this is so exciting. So I always like to say, let's keep focused on, yes, we are celebrating that the old law that sucked is gone, but like we're also celebrating that we are making babies, we are creating families, and you know, we had the advantage of seeing what went wrong in other history and in other states, and now we have it's the gold standard of the law. It really models and codifies all the best practices so that we can help families, whether you've struggled or not.
And I think a lot of what's in the law is, you know, what would be best practices in any state, right? And what we hope that others follow, regardless of if it's mandated or not. So, and so I'd love to get into, you know, some of the questions out there. Obviously, you are both so deep into this. You get a lot of questions from intended parents, some confusion, maybe some, if you will, negative misperceptions. So I'd love to dive into that from, you know, legal perspective, if, you know, there's any you'd like to dispel, Alexis. And then Angela also, sorry, my Alexa just answered me.
That always happens to me.
Angela, also, you know, there's questions out there about if it's much more expensive to do surrogacy in New York and what some of the, you know, insurance policies and regulations entail. So I'd love to kind of cover that and dispel, kind of explain a little bit more in depth, if you really look at it accurately, that some of these things really aren't something to worry about. So maybe Alexis, we'll start with you.
Yeah, don't say Alexa. It's
I know.
trigger your thing again.
She's like talking to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just talk about two of the big ones that I hear a lot. People say have all sorts of concerns, which is understandable. But the first one is not financial. The second one is. So the first one is that I hear that people are fearful that there is so much autonomy given to the surrogate under our law because of, like what Angela was talking about, this Surrogate's Bill of Rights, that it's frightening that intended parents may have so much less say in how the pregnancy itself unfolds and in medical decision making, et cetera. And to that, I say what Angela said earlier, which is that is no different than the law in any other state. We also live in a country where the right to terminate a pregnancy is a constitutional right. You cannot contract around that. So while our law specifically states it, it doesn't mean it's not the case in other states, and it doesn't mean it wouldn't be required provision of a contract if you're working with good lawyers and you're working with a good agency already, right? Mm-hmm. So we're codifying what already exists.
Yeah, and not to interrupt,
go ahead.
Every single one of my contracts had a huge clause in bold that basically states, even though we're entering into an intent, that the intended parents will make the decision in regards to termination, the surrogate, Angela, has all full autonomy and cannot be held responsible to not terminate or terminate at the advice or direction of the intended parent because of a constitutionally protected right. It's nothing that's different. It simply is now stated in something called the Surrogate Bill of Rights. That's it. It's
right. So New Yorkers that were doing surrogacy out of state in the past were signing the contract.
Yep, of course.
That said
exactly right.
Right. So
yeah,
everyone should be clear on that.
Of course.
Yeah.
Right. So that I like, that immediately take it off the table. And you're still involved in the process. You can go to the appointments. I mean, there's no difference between the experience you would have here and you'd have anywhere else, except for that, frankly, it's better, right? It's more secure. And people go into it with eyes wide open. And the informed consent that's required for all the parties going into it is ensured. And that's a safety net. Like that's almost something that should give comfort rather than fear. So that was one thing I hear a lot. And another thing I hear a lot, like you said, was the insurance piece, because our law says that for not just the duration of the pregnancy, but for 12 months after the pregnancy, the insurance coverage has to continue. Well, I mean, to that, I also say, and look, in New York, we have some other progressive laws that are great, which one of them is a recent update, which is that all employers with 100 or more employees have to, with their group coverage, have to not have a surrogacy exclusion in their health insurance. So many surrogates who do this will have her own health insurance, and there's not going to be a surrogacy exclusion. Now, that doesn't necessarily exist in other states. So it's kind of like, you give a little here, you get a little there. And also if you're looking at different policies, I mean, New York is going to have a whole new open market of policies at some point soon, I'm sure. And it's going to be competitive with the rest of the policies that people are taking out across the country. So I really don't see a difference in that financial perspective either, especially when you juxtapose it with the travel costs, et cetera, that you would have to incur if you were going out of state. So, yeah, I mean, you can tell I'm
whether you're traveling or you're surrogate.
Like, right. But
and
it's the truth. All of this is the truth.
And the other thing is, so obviously we work in a ton of different states currently, and this is anecdotal, so no one blow me up if this is a little bit off, but I can say from our personal clients, only about 3 of every 10 have a surrogacy friendly policy. So the other, 7 that we are working with, we need to work with a exchange or a broker that helps us source a surrogacy friendly policy on the exchange. and we've had a great advantage this year because of COVID and a new administration. The exchange period has been extended, and so even though typically it ends, in January, February, depending on the state, it's been extended all through the summer and through the end of the year. That all being said, when you purchase a surrogacy-friendly policy for a carrier, that policy is only for surrogacy. It is only for pregnancy. So that is they start using that when they go to their first obstetric appointment. So when you look at the cost of that policy, you have to consider more than just the premium. You have to consider all of the out-of-pocket maximum and minimums. You have to consider all of the copays. You have to consider all percentages of what you have to pay, because there's no one else from the family and there's no other claims that are going to be going against that policy. So when I give quotes to intended parents, I give them a quote about what the full policy is going to cost, what the out-of-pocket maximum is, what all of the copays and deductible are, and worst case scenario in regards to if the carrier had to deliver in a hospital that isn't covered by that particular policy, which does happen sometimes when things change. That's very expensive. You go to states like California insurance companies also put a lien on the carrier's compensation. So I have a carrier right now in California whose insurance obligation for the intended parents is $38,000. That is just the insurance, because the state of California has allowed insurance companies to put a lien against the carrier's compensation in order to recoup some of the money that they are using to pay for a surrogacy pregnancy. If you look at what's going on in New York, which is, an independent, this is a new thing, no one else is doing this. You have a family policy. The intended parent is not responsible for the totality of their monthly premium. If, let's just say for the sake of the discussion, there's a family of 4, your attorney working with the escrow company is going to basically put together an algorithm about what her particular responsibility within that is, and the intended parents will pay that. So if you put that even for a full 2 years, most likely that's not going to be even remotely close to what we're paying in some of these other states. Because in addition to that, her kids, her husband, all the other things that they're doing for medical, well visits, any kind of procedures, they're hitting the deductible with that. They're, paying those out-of-pocket maximums. So we've done, some side-by-side comparison based on what it would take with a policy in New York and that proration versus one that we have in Oregon. And it's considerably cheaper.
Right. And when you're talking about the 7 out of 10, when you're talking about the 7 out of 10, this is all from prior journeys, right? So out of state, where what you're referring to, right? And so I think while some of this may sound a little bit complicated, obviously you have to learn all about it as part of beginning your journey. I would say that's a good argument to not oversimplify it and just say, oh, it's going to be more expensive in New York, and insurance is a bigger cost in New York. And it's just, that's really oversimplifying it. There's so many cases here, companies of over 100, et cetera.
Yeah, and variables.
Where you actually may end up spending less. So just really take the time to consult, and you may get really good news, especially based on who you match with. And you could even talk about that as part of your matching process, right? So yes, it's complicated, but the whole journey is get really good people to support you and educate you, and don't oversimplify it and just make an assumption that it will definitely cost more for insurance. And also, even if it does cost a little more, there's all these offsets of like not having to travel or have your surrogate travel. And so thank you for kind of summarizing that from a financial perspective. Another thing we just wanted to touch on is that, there still is currently a waiting period, right? Because, agencies really getting started, you're still kind of in the process of getting licenses approved through the Department of Health to operate your gestational surrogacy programs in the state. I think really close to almost being done. It was just a long application process, but I just would love to hear about this. Angela, what are your thoughts about the timing of this being finalized? And also, even though what can you do and what can't you? I know there's some things that you can be working on while you're waiting to be able to start legally matching people.
Yeah, so firstly, I'd like to state that starting last Friday, the Department of Health did.
Oh, she's frozen.
Department of Health did start to issue licenses. And so there are a lot of agencies that have those licenses.
It just came through.
Great. They just came through as of Friday, and clinics who have a little bit of a different responsibility. Their responsibility is registration, not licensing, but they still did have to do a few things. The last that I spoke to the DOH, which was on Friday, they said that they're expecting anyone that has applied before May 1st to have had an approval, assuming they met all of those requirements by June 16th. So we're very, very close. The language is really clear. It's about matching activities. And so prior to us being licensed, what we focused on was really getting our carriers prepared. So we had them meet with great New York attorneys to help them go through the gestational surrogate bill of rights. We had them go meet with, an MFM to talk about the risks of surrogate pregnancy. We did a lot of webinars around surrogacy in general, had them do, meet and greets with people who have been carriers in other places. We made sure their pap was, their pap smear was up to date. We made sure that they, really did all that they could do to get their profile ready, to just, really prepare themselves. What was prohibited prior to those licenses was actually matching people. So going under contracts, physically saying that these people are matching, and then moving forward with like protocols and things like that. Mm-hmm. But I think that that's a really good segue. And I can also let Alexis talk a little bit more as well. CPSA is the first, it's the first mandate. New York is the first state to have any kind of licensing requirement for an agency. And this is probably what we get the most discussion about in regards to our questions on social media, when we have consults, our blog commentary about, why would we want a governmental agency overseeing something they don't understand. And I always kind of liken it to, and it might not be the most popular of opinions, but I think we can kind of see how self-governance worked this last year with masks. And I don't know that self-governance is always maybe, the best of choices. And if you go through the list of the things that the DOH was requesting as far as what it would take to get licensed, it's really not at all erroneous. It's really what every agency should have at its fingertips. So just, I'm not going to go through the exhaustive list, but anyone that has a financial stake in your company, you had to have a credit check, but also an outside private investigator look into all of your backgrounds and all of your past to ensure that you're financially stable. You've never been part of a bankruptcy. You've never had any kind of charges for fraud or anything that could, maybe cause you to not be an honest and ethical agency owner. You had to basically provide your conflict of interest policy, which is something that we really didn't get into, but there's a lot of restrictions around kickbacks between clinics and attorneys, and a lot of things that have been going on for a very long time. You had to show that you're giving the carrier the surrogate bill of rights, the very first consultation, so that it's the very first piece of information that they have. You had to provide your training materials, your contracts, your policies, your procedures. I mean, none of those things to me, you're looking at intended parents that in some situations, especially international parents, or maybe those that need egg donors or have to try several times, this could be the largest financial transaction that they ever undertake. Mm-hmm. So why would an agency not welcome an ability to establish a baseline of trust by giving basic understanding and criteria about who you are? I am open, and as was, everyone at my agency, and I know there's a lot of other amazing agencies out there that also open themselves up to that scrutiny. But in my opinion, there was not anything in that ask that was over and above what we should have had at our fingertips.
Right.
Was there a little baseline? Yeah, there was a little of adjustment that had to be made because some of the last minute changes to the language, to just making sure that we were, being 1000% compliant with some of the did it roll out perfectly? No. Do I wish they would have told us that even though the law was going live February 15th, that we would still have to wait for this? I would have loved to have known that we could have, done this in preparation, because we had a lot of intended parents that were really, really looking forward to moving forward. They had, a family member carrier that they were going to pay ready to go. And here they are, most still sitting, but now we're starting to finally move forward. So it was definitely a disappointment, but I would rather err on the side of making sure we're doing the right thing, keeping escrow separate, making sure that everyone is well vetted, that everyone is well prepared. And that is not that's not an over the top ask. And I believe it's something that intended parents should look at an agency and say, wow, they were willing to do that. They were willing to do that quickly. And they passed that rigorous screening. And I'm sure as time goes on, the DOH is going to get more staff that understand surrogacy. We're going to be able to have a voice in forums that will allow this process to be more streamlined. But I am quite suspect of any agency that's pushing so hard on the licensing process. I'd like to know what it is about it that makes them, have so much angst.
I mean, and we can, and honestly, just analogize it to what we were saying before, which is that we're not doing anything different that is not already a best practice.
Exactly.
Anywhere else. We're just codifying it. And in this sense, finally, we were last to the party, in legalizing it. But in this sense, I think New York is going to be a pioneer. And I've heard other states are now looking at going back and having agency licensure be a requirement too. So it's codifying what should be best practices. It's not the government dictating anything about the medical procedure or the contracts or anything like that. It's just saying, let's make sure, like Angela said earlier, that all the professionals who are involved in this, right, have their undivided loyalty where their undivided loyalty needs to be. That's it.
Perfect.
And the biggest pushback, pushback I've heard about in regards to it is a lot of the things that they have basically said can't happen in regards to some of the kickbacks that are going on. So, an agency getting a referral fee to refer to a particular kind of clinic, or for them to refer to an attorney. And, our philosophy at Alcea, and I know, everyone has a right to run their business in the way that they feel fit. But for me, I think that there are attorneys out there that specialize in all kinds of different things. And so we've got a lot of LGBTQIA clients, and we've got attorneys that also are LGBTQIA that work in different networks. And I want to refer to them. I don't want to refer to them because they're going to give me a kickback. And I think that some of those, financial exchanges seemingly caused because these people have built relationships. And I understand that, right? We all have to make money in order to do good, good work. But I think that was one of the number one things that I heard quite a bit of pushback about.
And just to clarify before we move on from this waiting period, Alexis, why are we waiting to match? Obviously agencies are in the process of, or just getting their licenses and doing some of the work with getting their surrogates ready and getting their intended parents ready. But the actual matching process, if that was done before the agency was fully licensed, what would be the consequences?
Well, it's just so when you say, why are we doing it? It's because there were regulations issued attendant to the statute itself. And the regulations spell out what it is that agencies need to do in order to get licensed and what it is that clinics need to do in order to register.
But what would be the complications if for any reason they sped up the process and matched people before?
Oh gosh, I mean, we don't know because we haven't had the benefit of seeing how things would go wrong and if there would be lawsuits. But the bottom line is you don't want to do anything to jeopardize getting that judgment of parentage pre-birth order in hand. And so I don't know, could a court maybe find that the contract wasn't enforceable because you were matched before you were supposed to be? Maybe. I don't think courts are out to penalize people in that way. They're, so it's not like invalidating the whole structure that we've just worked so hard to get into place. And it's a really short window. Angela,
just wait a few more weeks. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it's already started. They're starting with New York agencies. I don't know the exact number. But the DOH representative that I talked to on Friday, I know they did hundreds of clinics And I know they're starting with New York agencies, and I know, of 6 or 7 for sure. And, they were very clear that within the next month, anyone who met the criteria is going to have that license number. So we're not talking, and you got to remember, I know it feels yucky in the moment. And I have these intended parents that, they cry and they're so upset, and we so are empathetic to that. But then they kind of take a step back and think, you know what, I've been at this for 6 years. If one more month means that I can guarantee my parentage is going to be okay and that we met all of these rules, it's okay. We're not talking, years from now. And we all agree it could have been rolled out better, but it is what it is. And now what we have to do is deal with it and, do all we can when it comes to the, there's been the law states we're going to have to do this on a yearly basis. So let's get in front of the DOH early in the process and understand, what are we going to have to do to renew? Is this going to cause a delay? And that way we can start setting more realistic expectations. I think this was just about the surprise of it, not necessarily about it. It was that everyone thought we were moving forward. February 15th was a Sunday, and then Friday they dropped, this long list, and they didn't even tell us what that list was until the following week. So it took quite a bit of time to
you're almost there, or you are there.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're close to running out of time, but before we almost wrap up, I wanted to just jump into a couple of personal notes from some of your fairly recent experiences. I guess starting with Alexis.
Sorry, you cut out for 1 second, so I didn't hear you.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about your role in advocating for this in Albany. I believe, can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I can't see myself for some reason.
Oh,
there I am.
There, we see you. We saw you the whole time.
Okay.
So I believe your gestational carrier joined you in your advocacy and lobbying journey. You made friends with Andy Cohen, no big deal. So it must have been a pretty, selfie friends. It was a pretty memorable experience, I imagine. So what did that mean to you?
Oh my gosh, it was amazing. I went to Albany on a number of occasions. We had lobby days, especially towards the end of the last 2 years, and we would go and kind of listen to the governor, and we would go meet with lawmakers. And on one of the occasions in Albany and on a different occasion in New York City, the woman who carried both my babies, she drove 8.5, 9 hours to come meet me, and we did it together. And I remember we were sitting and listening to the governor on one of the occasions, and one of us, we were both crying, of course, and one of us reached out to hold the hand of the other. And then we walked out at the end of it, and these other 2 women came up to us and they said, "Can we just ask, are you guys intended mom and surrogate?" And we're like, "Yeah, how'd you know?" They're like, "So are we." And
you can just tell,
it's palpable. You can feel this unique bond between the other people. These women had been in each other's lives for 28 years because I think they said the oldest of the children that she carried was 28. So 29 years. And it's a bond that you cannot replicate at all. It goes in both directions. I can't really explain it. Like Angela said, it's not something that feels natural, but once you live it, it's natural.
Mm-hmm. Well, and just, people should remember, so many people, so many amazing organizations work so hard for this for so long. So it's just amazing that it's here and that, New Yorkers have this opportunity now, right? And you're one of them. So again, thank you. And then Angela, this is kind of a interesting story. Alcea was part of the journey to the first baby born via gestational surrogacy in New York, but that's not exactly how it sounds, right? Nothing was done out of compliance, just the baby was physically born in New York. And I know the story's out there. So, if you could just quickly, it's an interesting story. If you want to just quickly share and help everyone understand what that looked like.
Yeah, so I think, again, we kind of go back to a lot of misunderstandings and just kind of misnomers about last year and how things happened with COVID. So I think people forget that fertility care in most states became critical and a priority care as early as June, depending upon what state you lived in. So it is obviously a situation in which a lot of women are on a time frame because of age, because of, pending cancer treatments, because of a lot of other things. And so last year during the pandemic going on, we did more shipping of embryos than we did shipping of people, simply to keep people safe. And I think the other thing that people need to remember is that just by the altruistic nature of people in healthcare, we have a lot of nurses, CNAs, respiratory therapists in our pipeline who work in facilities in which endocrinologists are present. And so a lot of agencies, ourselves included, got really creative when we had intended parents in other states that wanted to continue, and as soon as it was legal and the
Sorry, while you're
decision.
talking, I'm going to try to help Alexis rejoin because she just
sure
fell off.
Sure.
But go ahead.
Okay, so it became what was considered mandated and prioritized care as early as June, and in almost all states by July. And so instead of moving people and risking COVID, we would move embryos to the actual carrier and ensure that the transfer was being, done in a safe place. And like I said, oftentimes in the own doctor's offices that they worked in. So there was a lot of really unique circumstances in which we didn't have to move people across the country during a pandemic. And so we had, a carrier in Texas who had some intended parents that were in New York, and they had a very, unique experience and circumstance that did not allow them to travel, which is really none of anyone's business as to the reason why, but it was a true precursor to them getting there, to be there. And so we talked about a lot of options. Do we have someone like myself, bring the baby to them? But that was not something that they felt emotionally like they wanted. They really wanted to be there and present for the birth. And so we ultimately made the decision to have the carrier go to New York after the February 15th CPSA law was legal, and had, 4 very respected and well-known attorneys that worked very closely with Cuomo himself, as well as some of the others that helped, write the laws within the statute that said that although the birth certificate process was a little bit different, under the CPSA as it stands now, now that if you were, all of it's done in New York, you would have your parents, the names of the parents on the birth certificate automatically. In this particular situation, that's not what had happened, just because the situation was different. The parents were fine with that. It still means that they will be on there, or they are on there. It just took a little bit of extra court work to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got the pre-approval from the people that we needed to do that pre-approval from, and made that happen in order to bring that family together under a very unique circumstance in which they would have had to miss a very important part of their life. And so, I think that the interwebs
worked out how it was meant to. And
exactly. And the interwebs love to, take stories and run with them and assume all kinds of things that, are just, surrogacy as a whole, I think, has a lot of misguided and kind of, assumptions that are just frankly incorrect. And anytime you throw in an element of drama, it opens up people's, ability to kind of go down rabbit holes. And, you just kind of have to smile, keep your head up, and know that you're doing the right thing, and that there's, absolutely nothing unethical about what was done in that particular situation. And what was really amazing about it, and I'll conclude by saying, so the hospital that we delivered at had never had a compensated surrogacy before. They had only had altruistic surrogacy situations. And so we are now working to do education so that as these surrogates begin to deliver, some of the very soft type skills that are needed in these situations, like I'll use the example, the carrier sitting in the bed, the intended parents are in another room, and the nurse comes in having no idea what the situation is and says, "Oh, how's mom? How's baby? How's breastfeeding going?" It wasn't intentional. It wasn't her trying to be insensitive. And, you know, this carrier's the best. She's a warrior. Like, she was like, you know, and just kind of giggled about it.
No,
But,
yeah.
you know, in Texas, for example, the hospitals that we deliver at, they have magnets that have colors that they put on the door. And, you know, if that magnet is on there, that this is a carrier and it's not someone that you should ask, you know, particular questions about. It's something that they had never thought of. You know, paperwork. Some of the paperwork that they wanted them to sign was more adoption related versus surrogacy related. Wristbands, you know, and so we were able to really set the stage to help them to recognize that they had some work to do. And so we're working now with one of their top MFMs to do all the MFM clearances for our carriers. We're helping with some education for a lot of OBs that are in the area to make sure that there's a you know, a really good transparent understanding, as well as working with that hospital to train a team of people who will be on point to help with surrogacy arrangements so that they have the sensitivity for both the carriers and the intended parents. So it was really,
that was a good opportunity to get that started sooner.
Amazing. Yeah. And instead of having, you know, one of the first people that comes in and you know, faces some of those things without, and, you know, I, as an agency owner, I was there and present. And so I was able to kind of run point, if you will, but both the intended parents nor the carrier had a lot of idea about what should have been happening. And there would have been documents signed, other things that would have happened, and not the majority of people aren't going to have that advocate. And so, you know, having the advocate, I think for the first one really helped the hospital to understand, oh my gosh, maybe we didn't know enough about this. Maybe we didn't know as much as we thought. So it was amazing. And I want to be clear, just because I know how people run with stories, nothing about what was done was unethical. Lots of you know, vetting went into making sure that we could do it legally. It was a little different than how it's handled under the CPSA now. But, you know, it was an absolutely amazing experience for everyone. And I'm really happy that we were able to be a part of something so groundbreaking.
Well, congrats to the parents and to everyone involved. They now have, what, a 2-month-old, I think, right? So 3 months.
Yeah, I don't even, yeah. I've had
basic math.
There's yeah, a lot.
I forgot what day it was, but it was after February 15th.
It was after February 15th. I promise you that.
Yes. Yeah. And so we actually just had a question also come in through Instagram about differences related to the surrogacy process and costs and such for same-sex couples. So I want to get to this really quickly. I'll say from GoStork's perspective, we're entirely free to use for all intended parents, so that it doesn't matter if you're same-sex couple, straight couple, single. You can use our platform entirely for free. You can vet over 50 different surrogacy agencies, learn all about them, compare them side by side, chat with them, book appointments with them, all unlimited usage, all for free. And additionally, if you're a same-sex couple during surrogacy, there's probably a likelihood you need an egg donor. So we also have the largest platform, the largest free online database of egg donors, over 10,000 from many different agencies. You get unlimited access for free. And so we don't have any cost differences. We do ask in the registration process about your sexual orientation, and that's only because it helps us best filter your results. It's, you know, it's a lot of results when you have the largest online database, and we want to make sure that you're seeing providers that are very, you know, LGBTQIA friendly, egg donors that would be really excited to donate their eggs to a same-sex couple. So we want to make sure to add that layer of sensitivity into our technology. So that's the reason we would actually ask you in the process. And
so,
just
Rebecca,
make sure that
do you mind if I just jump in next, because I actually do have to go in a minute.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, mother duty does call. See, so it's not just the fun part at all this, but
So
like,
tell us if you have anything different there, and if you have any last words of wisdom, inspiration, or hope for new intended parents.
Yeah, no difference in it, you know, there's no difference in price. Come one, come all. I mean, like you just said, the only variation would be if you need an egg donor contract and a surrogacy contract. From a legal perspective, that's 2 contracts, but no other difference. No, I think the words of wisdom, the feel good stuff I said before, which is just, you know, it can be viewed, this process as an intended parent can be viewed as daunting and unfair, and you know, why do I have to not have the normal experience, and why do I have to shell out more money and then a heartache and everything? Or it can be viewed as like a real miracle and your own unique story. And a story that your children are going to have that's unique, and an opportunity to bond in a human way that a lot of people don't have. And so I really just want to encourage people to believe that it's not just words. You know, you hear that and you say, I heard the same thing when I heard this. I'm like, okay, yeah, right. No, it happens. It happens with everybody who's been through it that I've ever spoken to. Angela says it too. It's a beautiful thing. And it's just part of the journey, right? You're the parent for the rest of their lives. This is just one step along the way. And I remember when they put my son on my chest for the first time, I had seen pictures of him. I knew he was mine and everything, but then I felt him breathe and I felt him move. It was the first time I had felt him move. And I had this moment of like, okay, well, I didn't feel it inside me, but now he's here and that's it. And it's only forward from here, right? So just smile when you think about it. Get a good team of people working with you, like everybody on this call, to support you, and just like, you know, live in the moment. And call.
Thank you so much, you know, for everything you do.
Thank
and for
you
joining
both.
us
I'm
today.
sorry I have to run, but it's like
We'll talk.
Soccer
Thank you.
or hip hop. I don't know. Okay. Bye.
We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
And Angela, any final words of wisdom, inspiration, etc., for new intended parents just starting their journey?
Yeah. You know, I think you started that question by saying, you know, about same-sex couples and the whole egg donation process.
Anything you want to add?
Yeah,
I think
and it'll be a good segue into, I think, where my words of wisdom are. You know, I think that you know, obviously, even though same-sex couples know from the very beginning that they're going to have to use an alternative method to become parents, it's still something that they have to come to terms with, and it's a place in which they've got to have peace with that decision. And I always would assume, being an outsider, you know, not walking that path or having that lived experience, that the surrogacy piece for intended fathers would be the most difficult. But time and time again, what we hear is that the egg donor piece is actually the most difficult. And, you know, we hear a lot of, well, we're writing the story of our, you know, future child and all of those things. And I always try to encourage intended fathers, and even, you know, straight couples who have to use an egg donor. As an adopted person, I know my biological siblings, and I also have an adopted sister who is, so I have 3 siblings, 2 of which my biological family raised, and an older sister that was also given up for adoption like myself. And even though we came from, you know, what was a similar gene pool, the differences in our lives can, you know, they're very palpable. And I always tell intended parents that they're coming to this in the most prepared way possible. They've done the research, they've put in the hours, they've saved the money. They are going to be amazing parents, and they can pick the best egg donor in the entire world. But if no one's reading to that egg donor at home, it doesn't matter that she's an intellectual. You know, just because someone looks like an Instagram model doesn't mean that that's how the Punnett Square is going to end up. So just look at those donors as someone that could speak to you. And I think that, you know, sometimes that ability to maybe look past what you think is the aesthetic or educational background that you need should just really be about knowing that you're going to shape your child into something amazing. Because people that go down the path of surrogacy and egg donation are far more prepared than I was when my husband and I decided to have kids well before we probably should have. And so I think that pressure, you know, can, you know, get to be a little much for folks. But, you know, given that I've got such a unique experience in being adopted, caring for intended fathers, as well as 2 straight couples who had very different situations, I would always just want people to know that we talk a lot about the grace and the joy that surrogacy brings to intended parents. And obviously that's their lived experience, and I've seen it firsthand. It's absolutely amazing. But I can also attest, and I could, you know, give you a list of so many women that would say that surrogacy brought them just as much happiness and just as much joy as the intended parents. It's different, right? It's not the same. It's not this lived dream where you've wanted this baby forever and you'll finally get it. But being a part of something so amazing and being part of someone's origin story, it really gives you a sense of peace and a sense that you have done something more and bigger than yourself. I mean, it's an enormous commitment, but it's an enormous commitment that has a payoff that is far beyond any of the sacrifice, any of the shots, any of those other things. I'm, very fortunate. I had a lot of pregnancies. I've never had any issues. I've had, perfect kind of pregnancies. And I felt almost as if that was something that I owed other people, simply because I can't imagine my life without my children. And I have a unique experience in which, my biological mother didn't have the option to parent her children, and that affected her for the rest of her life. And so knowing that becoming a mother, a father, a parent, if you choose, that's what you would like to do. A lot of people choose to be childless, and that's, we all make different decisions, and I respect anyone's choice. But for me personally, being a mother and having a family was something that I couldn't imagine my life being as it is today without. And knowing that I kind of had that, it's not a skill. It's just something that I had just genetics blessed me
to do.
Yeah. And my little brother's gay. And when I met my intended fathers, my older intended father of the two, he's not the most emotional of people. And I will never forget that after I had the baby, the second child, because I carried all three of their kids, he kind of teared up a little bit and he said, I've known I've been gay forever, and I always thought I was going to have to live one of two lives. I was going to have to either have a beard and marry a woman and have no one know the wiser so that I could become a parent, or I would be childless. And that just hit home to me, because not being able to live your truth and not being able to live this authentic life, and then now having these options to have women like myself and others to give you this ability to live your truth. I think that a lot of women who think that they can't do it actually probably can, because this whole "you want to keep the baby" kind of thing, I promise you're not going to want to. If you want to have your own baby, there's a far lot easier ways to do it than going through this enormous process, right? And so I would just encourage everyone to open their minds and open their hearts, and maybe just overlook some of the predispositioned ideas that society has, and just think about things from the perspective outside your own purview. Others have other paths that they must take, and we should respect those. And just because it's not for you doesn't mean that you can't respect that it's for someone else.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that whole perspective. I wanted to touch on one thing you said in there about, for this person asking the question, if you're just starting to think about this and are just starting to think about then egg donation as well. Like Angela said, it's not just about the appearance, and sometimes you can try to match like your hair color or your eye color, but we hear from a lot of intended parents that that's not enough. They really want to see like facial features that resemble them. You can look at their entire like racial and ethnic background. You can even try to match with someone who's the same religion as you. You can learn all about their medical history, their parents, their grandparents,
all of it,
videos of them, so that you you're really sure that it's not just photos you're seeing that might be slightly glossed over, Photoshop. Everyone has filters, so you can see videos, and so there's so much you can learn about egg donors before you make a decision, to feel really comfortable from that component as well as the surrogacy component. It's just such an important decision, and part of the reason for GoStork is our founder's journey going through egg donation as well as surrogacy, and kind of everything we learned along the way and wanted to improve. So that's it for now. We had so much to talk about. Thank you. So many people said the nicest comments during this, Angela, especially about your stories. And so thank you to so many who joined.
Can I say one really quick thing?
Okay.
Really, I promise, super quick. You were talking about egg donation, and one of the things that I want to just make sure that is part of the CPSA that I think a lot of people don't have not talked about. So they have basically opened up both a surrogacy and an egg donation registry. So I would encourage people who are going through this process to look through. We actually, as an agency, have to ask our carrier if they'd like to opt in or opt out of that. But from a surrogacy perspective, that's a whole other conversation. But from an egg donor perspective, you got to remember that a lot of people donate multiple times. And so, 5, 6, 10 years down the line, if you need a bone marrow transplant or something for your child, it's not necessarily a bad idea to make sure that your egg donor is registering in that situation. So we have a blog on our website that talks really in depth about that. But being someone that didn't have access to my medical information, I would encourage everyone to really research that part of the egg donation process before making their decision.
Yeah, I mean, you can learn what the grandparents died of. You can learn how old their parents are and how healthy they are. All about their current medical history. If they drink or smoke, or if they don't,
but when they register
or not, but also, mental health. Also, if they have proven fertility, if they've done, if they've had successful pregnancies, if they've donated before and it's been successful.
Yes,
so
and they register.
You can really feel like,
and they register.
Like, you can make very informed decisions. We have all of this on GoStork for over 10,000 egg donors, but you can decide based on what's most important to you. If proven fertility is more important than brown hair, you can, or you can find someone with both. So,
but the new database requires that the donor, like if she's a donor once and she donates again, that she goes and puts that donor information in there, and it can be anonymous. It's basically by number, but long story short, that way, if you had an anomaly or something, you needed something health wise, you can go through that database to get that information. And that's kind of a new concept. Anonymous donation used to be really kind of what people pushed. And I am a huge proponent. Alcea does not do anonymous donations, but that's a whole other discussion, because I feel that origin story is who you are and it's your superpower, and I think everyone deserves it. So.
Oh, and thank you, Rose. We will do more of these. We've done several amazing Instagram lives in the past with lawyers, with IVF warriors, with fertility finance coaches, nutritionists. So we'll be doing many more. And so just to wrap up, thank you again so much, Angela. So much helpful information, and just your personal perspective is really meaningful. And for everyone to be aware, Alcea is one of the 50 amazing agencies on GoStork. Again, you can find them there, compare them with other options, chat directly with Angela's team and book appointments with them directly. We're integrated with their calendar, and just so honored to have you in GoStork and for you to be here. And Alexis, you can find at the Warshaw Burstein website, obviously, but she's also on our blog. We recently featured her in a spotlight, highlighting her inspiring personal and professional journey, and all the great work she's done to support other intended parents after herself, as well as just other professionals in the industry. And just, again, if anyone has any questions you didn't get to ask here, you can feel free to DM us. We'll pass them along. We'll send you answers and get back to you. And if you have any other topics you'd like us to cover in these, you can always let me know in the comments or the DMs. And so, again, with that said, hope you all have
and visit us all at Pride. You, me, Amy, Dema, Brian, Alexis, we're all going to be there. So come visit us and learn more. And I cannot express my gratitude for this forum and being able to hopefully get people on board with really over
the amazing journey here.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. It was such a joy.
It from a surrogate herself. So thank you again. And everyone have a great rest of your day. You will see this in our IGTV soon. You'll see recaps in our blog if you missed any of it. So look for that. And thanks again for joining.
Thank you. You're always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.